The Butler by Ernest Hemingway. Ernest Miller Hemingway was born in Illinois, USA on July 21, 1899, and died at the age of 61 in Idaho after committing suicide. He wrote both novels and short stories, which were characterized by his accent by powerful prose. Among his pastimes, he enjoyed hunting, boxing, and bullfights, topics which transpired in his stories. The Butler is part of In Our Time, Hemingway's first important book published in 1925. Told by a third-person narrator and from a limited perspective, the story starts in medias res with Nick Adams, a recurring character in Hemingway's stories, watching a train going out of his sight and surrounded by water and tamarack swamp in northern Michigan. While Nick recalls, the reader learns that he had been hit by the brakeman, who had deceived him and kicked him off the train. All the story develops beside the train track and the swamp. The Butler seems to be part of Nick's journey, both literally and metaphorically, where he meets Ad Francis, a former boxer, and Bugs, his loyal friend. In fact, the title of the story may be referring to Ad, or perhaps Nick himself, while growing up and facing the real world.
Regarding Hemingway's writing style in the story, we can observe instances of what he calls the iceberg theory. An example of this is when Bugs tells Nick that he met Ad in jail and that he was there for cutting a man. There is a lot about Bugs behind what is stated that remains unknown to the reader, therefore increasing readers' engagement with the story and emphasizing its importance. Also, Hemingway often uses understatements in the story to describe events or feelings that are really meaningful and strengthen their impact on the reader. Some examples of these are when Ad introduces himself to Nick and says, "I'm crazy." Similarly, when Nick asks Bugs about Ad's mental health and says, beginning of quote, "What made him crazy?" Nick asked. "Oh, a lot of things," the Negro answered from the fire. "Would you like a cup of this coffee, Mr. Adams?" End of quote. And finally, during that same conversation, Bugs says, talking about Ad, he just went crazy. So what Hemingway does is to simplify or soften the importance of something so as to produce the opposite effect. In these quotes, previously mentioned, Ad's violent and tragic experiences are minimized to phrases such as "a lot of things" and "he just went crazy," when he is actually suffering due to these experiences. Another characteristic of Hemingway's writing is the use of simple and apparently casual dialogues that convey deep meaning. This style of writing builds tension as readers do not know what the characters are really thinking and, at the same time, make the story advance. A clear example of this is Nick's first conversation with Ab. Beginning of quote. "Listen," the man said. "Call me Ad." "Sure." "Listen," the little man said. "I'm not quite right." "What's the matter?" "I'm crazy." He put on his cap. Nick felt like laughing. "You're all right," he said. End of quote. So we are introduced to him as someone who is not quite right and crazy. Readers are given details about his personality in a few statements. We do not fully understand what the problem is yet, but we know that there is something wrong with this man. What is interesting to mention is that towards the end of the story, the sequence of dialogue is interrupted by a paragraph. Beginning of quote. "I can wake him up any time now, Mr. Adams. If you don't mind, I wish you'd sort of pull out. I don't like not to be hospitable, but it might disturb him back again to see you. I hate to have to thump him, and it's the only thing to do when he gets started. I have to sort of keep him away from people. You don't mind, do you, Mr. Adams?" "No, don't thank me, Mr. Adams. I'd have warned you about him, but he seemed to have taken such a liking to you, and I thought things were going to be all right. You'll hit a town about 2 miles up the track, Mancelona, they call it. Goodbye. I wish we could ask you to stay the night, but it's just out of the question. Would you like to take some of that ham and some bread with you? No? You better take a sandwich." All this in a low, smooth, polite nigger boys. Good. Well, goodbye, Mr. Adams. Goodbye and good luck. End of quote. So here we are only presented with what Bugs said to Nick, but not with Nick's answers, causing the story to advance faster and emphasizing Bugs' point of view in this part of the story.
Themes. As regards themes, the story seems to revolve around typically existential topics like the loss of innocence and the coming of age, and some other Hemingwayans like human beings' interactions surrounded by nature, violence, and masculinity. As mentioned before, Nick Adams' strange journey is interrupted by the brakeman. I quote, "What a lousy kid thing to have done. They will never sub him in that way again." The brakeman teaches Nick his first lesson in the story: trust no one. You cannot be naive if you want to survive in this man's world. Another striking theme in the story is the coming of age. In his encounter with Aunt Frances, Nick learns about Aunt's life. I quote, "You're all right," he said. "No, I'm not. I'm crazy." "Listen, you ever been crazy?" "No," Nick said. "How does it get you?" "I don't know," Ad said. "When you got it, you don't know about it." In his apparently simple dialogues, Hemingway brings profound topics into discussion. Ad's mental illness seems to be the consequence of a tough life, and getting into madness an unnoted possibility for everyone. A further theme in Hemingway's work is the interaction of humans in a natural environment. In The Butler, the setting of the story plays a vital role to set the mood of the interactions. I quote, "It was dark and he was a long way off from anywhere," describes the narrator. The three men find themselves far from society, in a pure state which seems to reveal the true nature of each of them. Finally, masculinity and violence are presented in the story as two interrelated themes. Nick's journey starts with a bigger and stronger man knocking him down. Encouraged by Ad, Nick seeks revenge. Later on, Ad tries to hit Nick and Bugs hits Ad on the back of his head. This is a story of man inflicting violence on man, of men initiating others in this masculine world through violence. Characters. In this short story, we are presented with three main characters: Nick Adams, Aunt Frances, and Bugs, and two secondary characters, Ad's wife/sister and the brakeman. They are depicted through physical description, speech, and actions. Starting with Nick Adams, whose characterization fits the typical Hemingwayan hero, he is presented as an inexperienced young man. His adventures started in previous short stories where readers learn about the early stages of his life. In The Butler, we see Nick on a journey of awareness, leaving everything that he knows behind. Although he still evinces the innocence of youth, Nick has become tough due to circumstances. The external and inner journey will inevitably change him, so in this sense, Nick Adams could be depicted as a dynamic character who not only evolves in this particular short story, but also in all the stories which follow his adventures. Then Aunt Frances, the former boxer who Nick's meet in his way, is portrayed as an experienced violent man. His physical description appears to stand for his inner state. Ad's body and mind show the consequences of a hard, violent life. Although he recognizes his madness, we as readers are not fully aware of what the character is capable of. We infer he's dangerous, but do not know to which extent. Another relevant aspect of this character is that he seems to mirror the ugly, violent side of Nick. Hemingway builds an intimate moment between these two characters before the third one comes into the scene, while he leaves some hints of this representation. For instance, the name selected for the character Ad is part of Nicholas Adams' name. Then both of them are hobos traveling around the country, and finally, both suffer the consequences of their life choices. The third and last main character to appear in the story is Bugs. It is noticeable how the narrator only refers to him as man once when Buck's figure appears in the distance. I quote, "It was a Negro's voice. Nick knew from the way he walked that he was a Negro." Leaving aside all the criticism Hemingway received for his apparent xenophobia, if we focus only on the word choice of the writer, we may think that the intention was to show the position that black people had in the society. What is more, the use of the dehumanizing violent noun nigger matches the growing violence of the story. Even though Bugs acts as a mediator between Nick and Ad, he also shows a violent pattern.
In Hemingway's style, where adjectives are so selectively chosen and utterances are usually of a simple structure, symbols play a major role. Even if at times their use seems understated, these symbols point to subjacent ideas and important feelings. The swamp, for instance, is described as ghostly in the rising mist, and at the same time, it is this mass that surrounds Nick. It's the same on both sides of the track. Not only does it depict Nick's frightened state of mind due to the hopelessness of the setting, it also surrounds and isolates Nick, which underscores his loneliness. Another symbol which is also part of the setting is the train track. It stands for Nick's transition towards maturity, a new phase in his life. Nick chooses to walk through it and realizes it is easy to walk on because of its solid structure, meaning he's grounded and willing to continue growing. The fire, together with the firelight, represents warmth, comfort, and hospitality. It is the firelight that attracts Nick and the reason he decides to take a detour from the track. Indeed, he is given food and warmth there, next to the fire. Moreover, the firelight reveals reality. It is in the firelight that Nick is able to see Ad's real face, an aspect that a puddle of water had not been able to do with his own face. He wished he could see it, could not see it looking into the water, though. Fire is warmth and comfort until the appearance of the knife, which triggers Ad's most violent side, unseen so far. It signals a breaking point in the story, a true cut, which gives rise to Nick's departure. As can be seen, symbols pervade the text and add more layers of meaning to both the story and the characters.
In conclusion, The Butler by Ernest Hemingway is an exploration of themes such as coming of age, loss of innocence, masculinity, violence, and human interaction within a natural setting. Through the journey of Nick Adams, the protagonist, readers witness his confrontation with the harsh realities of life, symbolized by encounters with characters like Art Francis and Bugs. So, Hemingway's signature style, characterized by simple and seemingly casual dialogues, understatements, and the use of iceberg theory, enhances the story's impact, leaving much unsaid yet deeply felt. Symbols such as the swamp, the train track, the fire, and the knife enrich the narrative, adding layers of meaning to the characters and their experiences. Thus, The Butler stands as an example of Hemingway's mastery in crafting profound and evocative storytelling.